Chapter 2. Jonathan Harker's Journal. May 5th. When the Count saw my face, his eyes blazed with a sort of demoniac fury, and he suddenly made a grab at my throat. I drew away, and his hand touched the string of beads which held the crucifix. It made an instant change in him, for the fury passed so quickly that I could hardly believe that it was ever there. "Take care," he said. "Take care how you cut yourself. It is more dangerous than you think in this country." Then, seizing the shaving glass, he went on, "And this is the wretched thing that has done the mischief. It is a foul bauble of man's vanity. Away with it!" And opening the window with one wrench of his terrible hand, he flung out the glass, which was shattered into 1,000 pieces on the stones of the courtyard far below. Then he withdrew without a word. It is very annoying, for I do not see how I am able to shave unless in my watch case or the bottom of the shaving pot, which is fortunately of metal. When I went into the dining room, breakfast was prepared, but I could not find the Count anywhere. So I breakfasted alone. It is strange that as yet I have not seen the Count eat or drink. He must be a very peculiar man. After breakfast, I did a little exploring in the castle. I went out on the stairs and found a room looking towards the south. The view was magnificent, and from where I stood there was every opportunity of seeing it. The castle is on the very edge of a terrible precipice. A stone falling from the window would fall 1,000 feet without touching anything. As far as the eye can reach is a sea of green treetops, with occasionally a deep rift where there is a chasm. Here, and there are silver threads where the rivers wind in deep gorges through the forests. But I am not in heart to describe beauty, for when I had seen the view, I explored further. Doors, doors, doors everywhere, and all locked and bolted. In no place save from the windows and the castle walls is there an available exit. The castle is a veritable prison, and I am a prisoner. The Count's warning came into my mind, but I took pleasure in disobeying it. The sense of freedom was sweet. I learned that there was little opportunity for any mischief, and that only for the watchfulness of the Count, and that even I, if I wished it, could have no opportunity of a willful escape. I made the rounds of the place to explore and find something to pass the time. I went into the room from which I had first glimpsed the view of the precipice, but the small grated window only reminded me of the fact that the castle was a prison. I climbed up to the battlements and found that I was indeed in prison, and I surmised that if I should be able to escape, it would be into a chasm from which there was no return. As the Count did not come in, I have written here the incident of my first impression of the castle, and all I have done on my own. I believe the Count does sleep sometimes, though I have never seen him. For certain nights when he has not been in the castle, I have laid down in my room, as if the sound of the closing of doors and the turning of locks were enough for my rest. Thus the hours passed, and I was still waiting for the Count's return, and still without him. As yet I have seen nothing but the gloomy castle, and I have heard nothing but the sounds of the night, and that dreary world of noise of the wolves. I remember hearing once that wolves always mate for life. I hope it is not true for my sake. May 7th. It is again early morning, but I have rested and enjoyed the last 24 hours. The Count, even though he has taken great precautions with me, has not held back his conversation with me. As the night grew long, we talked of many things, and he began to talk about the past, and he spoke freely. I learned much about the history of this land, and also of some noble families of this land. He spoke of Transylvania as being part of Austria and not of Hungary, but he told me more of his own family, which is to me of more interest, and I will record what he said. "We Sikelis have a right to be proud, for in our veins flows the blood of many brave races who fought as the lion fights for lordship. Here, in the whirlpool of European races, the Ugric tribe bore down from Iceland the fighting spirit which Thor and Woden gave them, which their berserkers displayed to such fell intent on the seaboards of Europe, aye, and of Asia and Africa too, till the peoples thought that the werewolves themselves had come. Here too, when they came, they found the Huns, whose warlike fury had swept the earth like a living flame, till the dying peoples held that in their veins ran the blood of those old witches, who, expelled from Scythia, had mated with the devils in the desert. Fools, fools! What devil or what which was ever so great as Attila, whose blood is in these veins?" He held up his arms, Is it a wonder that we were a conquering race? That we were proud? That when the Magyar, the Lombard, the Avar, the Bulgar, or the Turk poured his thousands on our frontiers, we drove them back? Is it strange that when Arpad and his legions swept through the Hungarian fatherland, he found us here when he reached the frontier? That the Han Faglas was completed there? And when the Hungarian flood swept eastward, the Szekelys were claimed as kindred by the victorious Magyars, and to us for centuries was trusted the guarding of the frontier of Turkey land. Aye, and more than that, endless duty of the frontier guard, for as the Turks say, water sleeps, and the enemy is sleepless. Who more gladly than we throughout the four nations receive the bloody sword, or at its warlike call flocked quicker to the standard of the king? When was redeemed that great shame of my nation, the shame of Kosovo, when the flags of the Wallach and the Magyar went down beneath the crescent? Who was it but one of my own race who as voivode crossed the Danube and beat the Turk on his own ground? This was a Dracula indeed. Woe was it that his own unworthy brother, when he had fallen, sold his people to the Turk and brought the shame of slavery on them? Was it not this Dracula, indeed, who inspired that other of his race who in a later age again and again brought his forces over the great river into Turkey land? Who, when he was beaten back, came again and again, though he had to come alone from the bloody field where his troops were being slaughtered, since he knew that he alone could ultimately triumph. They said that in the later war the Szekelys were overreached by their own voivode, who sold his people and led the enemy to victory. But the Draculas, in their own ignorance, had to fight like other men, and they died and left a name to which men cling to this day, as the Attila to the shrines of their dead. He was so evidently in earnest that I thought the counter-argument was too serious for jest. But he went on, I am speaking of my own race. What do you know of that race? I knew he was leading up to something, so I said, You may speak freely, for I, indeed, have nothing to conceal from you. He shook his head and said, No, but you must have some knowledge of these things. You were educated as an Englishman and have lived among the peoples who are a descendant race. Your teachers must have taught you much about the ancestry of this race. As the Count spoke, I thought it better to take my time to answer the question, and I paused in my turn, trying to frame my answer in the form of a question. He spoke again. When I went to London, it was one of the subjects which attracted me most, and I found that my ancestors had been spoken of in almost as good a way as the English kings. I, too, have known the glory of my race. But you do not know the mystery of that race, the story of the voivode Dracula, which is a tale of darkness and terror to all who hear it. I thought it best to ask directly, What is that tale? The Count smiled with a contemptuous smile, and with an air of mystery which I did not like, as he answered, What, indeed? You would not understand, unless I explained it. Yet, it is a tale which all the peasants know, and of which they tell even their children. But I see that you do not want to hear it. You have a great deal of English prudery in you. You are afraid to hear the truth. He paused for a moment, then resumed, saying, So let me tell you, however, of the old days in this country, when the ancestors of this very man whose lands we now live in, and whose title we inherit, were famous in the land. Then I will tell you what I know of.